Being fluent in the basics allows you to be creative in writing, engineering, producing, and mixing music. If I showed you a DAW like Pro Tools, hit play, and asked you to make the guitars come out of only the left speaker, there's a good chance you could figure it out pretty quickly, even if you had never used Pro Tools before. If I were to ask the same thing to my grandmother, we'd probably be working on it all day. First, she doesn't know what to look for. Second, she probably takes for granted the existence of stereo and wouldn't even realize the extent to which we can control it. If she understood it, she could quickly test a pan to the left and move on with the mix. If she doesn't understand it, she'll be sitting there all day poking buttons. Just as my grandmother probably takes the technicalities of stereo for granted, hearing is something we take for granted, like breathing. If all is well, we ignore it. If something is not right, whether you cannot hear after being on an airplane, or you hear ringing after a loud concert, or even if you wired your car's stereo speakers wrong and they're out of phase, you'll take notice. And you'll probably become uncomfortable, grumpy, and maybe even frightened about what it would be like if your ears never went back to normal. Coincidentally, as I wrote this past sentence, my hearing went sort of dull in one of my ears, and first I got annoyed and hit my ear a few times, which is ridiculous and doesn't help anything. And then I felt my heart begin racing because I don't know why it happened. And then it went back to normal, and I became very conscious of the sound of silence, which for me is like a high-pitched hiss with a pulse. I don't tend to notice it until it isn't there. So pause and consider what silence sounds like to you. Seriously, hit pause. Because one of these days, you're going to be sitting in front of monitors that cost you a few $1,000s, trying to figure out if they're hissing or if they're silent. Creating sound. Well, where does sound begin then? Like most good things in life, it begins with a vibration. The sources of vibrations for our purposes are things like speakers, musical instruments, and vocal cords. Smack something, and for better or worse, it'll vibrate. It's for that reason that when you build monitor or speaker stands for a studio, one of the most effective solutions is a pile of concrete blocks. Here's the first activity that we're going to do together, and of course, it's optional. We are going to build some monitor stands. So go out and get yourself a stack of concrete blocks. Try to find some that, when you pile them up, are at the same height. You can pile them on your desk or on your floor, but when your speakers are on top of them, you want the tweeters of your speakers to be at ear level. And also, you don't want your cinder block towers to be shaky. So find blocks that fit together well. Again, stack them up, put your speakers on top so that when you're sitting at your desk, the tweeters are at ear level. And the front of your speaker should be flush or flat with the front of the blocks. And now you've just spent the best $3 of your life. Some people put cloth over the blocks to make them look prettier, or glue wood around the sides to hide that they're blocks. If you're a real go-getter, get your hand on some sorbothane pads to sit between the speaker and the stands, or in a pinch, some gel shoe insoles from the drugstore or an old rubbery mouse pad. The sorbothane is ideal, which you can buy from manufacturers precise for the weight of your speakers. But the other stuff will work pretty great as decouplers also. A prettier solution is steel stands filled with sand. The effect is the same though, to prevent vibration. Where else can you notice vibrations particularly? Well, an old drummer game is close your eyes and sort pairs of drumsticks by hitting them in the air and listening to their vibrations, the vibrations of the resonating sticks. Or bassists who are comfortable tuning by ear can use the feel of the vibrations from the neck of the bass to tune up an unplugged electric bass in a noisy room without being able to hear it at all. That trick has saved me a number of times. Lastly, if you play any instrument, you've probably had the miserable experience of some note you play causing the snare drum across the room to buzz loudly. The fact of the matter is that these vibrations are around you all day, every day. But it's not until you're focusing on sound or silence that you really notice them. And while this sounds obvious, vibrations are easy to take for granted or just ignore. And later on, they can have huge effects on everything from background noise in your recording to how well your mixes translate to other people's stereos. Consider a speaker cone, also known as a loudspeaker diaphragm. It vibrates with a back and forth motion. And here's an experiment you can try that I recommend doing at a music store, so in case you break something, at least you can sneak out. Just kidding. Go find their synth department and hit the lowest note on a synth on some bassy patch and just hold it. While it's likely you won't be able to hear anything because you're dealing with frequencies lower than human perception, if you watch the speaker, you'll see its cones slowly pumping in and out. What the diaphragm is doing then, and whenever it's vibrating, even if the vibrations are too small and quick to visibly notice, is pushing and pulling against the molecules of the air. When it pushes outward, the air molecules it's pushing against move closer together, creating an area of higher air pressure. And this situation is known as compression. When it pulls inward, the air molecules move farther apart, known as rarefaction, which creates an area of lower air pressure. The alternation of compression and rarefaction produces a wave. And when you have one compression and one rarefaction, you have one wave. So when you are on the verge of using the low note of the synth to view the speaker cone vibrating, when the cone pumps out and then goes back in, it has just produced a single wave. Now, this is a hefty concept, and in the next lecture, we're going to consider other ways of looking at it. And just to make sure you understand what's going on, ask yourself if you know what's going on, and be honest, because every lecture will build on the one before it. If you're not taking notes, take notes. If you don't understand something, listen again, take notes. Listen to the next lecture, where I'll often try to explain the same concepts in different terms, and repeat until you get it. If you don't get it, feel free to send me your questions. It's important to me that this makes sense to you. These same instructions go for every lecture, and I won't be repeating them. If you're ready, let's move on. If you're not ready, listen to this lecture again. No one will laugh at you. It's not about getting through the lectures. It's about understanding the content and being able to make use of it.